Right, this is the second of two videos to go with the antenatal and postnatal screening. Technically it's the third, because I've recorded a video for those of you that are crashing this to have a wee look at basic genetics, which I will kind of go over just now. And then I recorded the first of the two videos which actually go with the topic, which cover the various types of ante and postnatal screening that go on. I did mention the idea that we can use family trees to start to think about likelihood of offspring having certain conditions, and that's what we're going to look at just now. There are basically four different scenarios, four different ways that things can be inherited. To start with, we're going to look at the idea that, well, to very much to start with, we're going to think about the idea that, well, we need to know what these words mean. And we also have sex chromosomes. So these words will be new to you. What the genes that are, the chromosomes that we inherit from our mum and our dad consist of autosomes and sex chromosomes. We inherit 22 autosomes from each parent and one sex chromosome. Right? You will know this from National 5, you probably already know it anyway, but if you inherit an X chromosome from your mum and an X chromosome from your dad, you're a female. If you inherit an X chromosome from your mum, bear in mind your mum can only pass on an X chromosome because every woman's only got 2 X chromosomes. But if you inherit a Y chromosome from your dad, then that makes you a boy, right? So we inherit 22 plus 22 autosomes, that's just ordinary non-sex chromosomes, and we inherit an X and a Y, or 2 X chromosomes, and there are sex chromosomes. So I'm going to start to talk about autosomes. You need to know that they are the ordinary chromosomes that people inherit from parents, not the sex chromosomes, okay? So there are four different scenarios of inheritance. The first one I want to think about is very basic from National 5. This idea that it is autosomal, meaning it's found on ordinary chromosomes, like most characteristics are, autosomal dominant. Okay, so let's take, for example, a condition which is represented by the letter big R, right? So it's dominant. So we think about 4 sets of grandparents. There's a set of grandparents 1. There's, I said 4 pairs, I meant 2 pairs, 4 sets of grandparents. And let's make the other set of grandparents completely recessive. Okay? So these are genotypes, of course, these are the genes that a person inherits. And the only possibility, if both parents here have got all big R's, is that that individual has inherited a big R from both as well. So they'll show that dominant characteristic in their phenotype. Similarly over here, but in the opposite way, these two parents will only ever give you offspring like that, which are going to have the recessive phenotype, and then if these two people were to then have a child, we could then start to think, because we understand about the genetics of the whole thing, that the individual here would have that. They would have inherited a big R from that parent and a small r from that parent. Now, if the condition is autosomal and dominant, what that means is that the people who are circle will have it, this person will have it, that person will have it, that person will have it, and so will this person, because remember, if it's dominant, you only need one of the 2 genes to be the dominant gene. It doesn't matter that that one's small r. This side of the family didn't have it, whatever this condition might be, but because this side of the family have, this offspring has ended up with it. Now, what you generally will find with autosomal dominant characteristics is that they will be found in every generation, right? That's the thing to remember about autosomal. They are found in every generation. Okay? So that's the first of the 4 scenarios. The next thing we're going to look at, so you might want to kind of pause that, think about that, you know, look at that for a little second. You can do what you want with the video, of course. We're now going to think about autosomal recessive conditions. So that is where a condition is inherited on the autosomes, but instead of it being the condition where you only need one gene. Remember, when something is recessive, you need to have inherited both genes as being the recessive form. So if it's autosomal recessive, it's inherited in a totally different way. We have, I want you to think about these two sets of grandparents here. We would think then about the offspring. There's all sorts of different possibilities if these are the two parents, right? So let's, for argument's sake, say that this individual passed on a dominant gene to that offspring, and this one a recessive. So we've ended up with dominant and recessive. And this one here, we did actually get the small r inherited and the small r inherited. There we go. So that's the two parents. And what we're thinking about here is what are the chances of this individual inheriting the recessive characteristic. Now, bearing in mind, it is possible that, in fact, probably worthwhile circling this one to show, actually in that family tree so far, that's the only person that actually has the condition. They have two small r's, they've inherited a recessive gene from both parents, so therefore they have that condition. What you will generally find is that autosomal recessive characteristics will generally skip a generation. Now, the situation that I've created here is slightly complex, because if these two parents have a baby, you can then start to think about the chances of that individual having the condition. So the only thing that this person here can inherit from that parent is a small r. It's the only thing. But because, remember, fertilisation is a random process. Remember, the process of meiosis it will create 50% bigger to be passed on and another 50% or smaller passed on. We don't know until fertilisation actually takes place. So it's possible that this parent passes on a big R to the next generation, in which case this person wouldn't have the condition. But it's also possible in this scenario that I've created that this is the thing, that this is the gene that gets passed on, and in that case the offspring would have the condition. But you will find that if a condition is autosomal recessive, that it will generally skip a generation. It doesn't in this particular case, but generally will. And crucially, they need to have two forms of the gene, one inherited from the male parent and one inherited from the female parent, in order to actually have the condition. So it's far less common to have an autosomal recessive condition than it is to have an autosomal dominant condition. So that's the second of the four scenarios that we can have in terms of inheritance. The third one is this idea that actually sometimes, and this isn't all that common, but there are examples of it, and this is the idea of incomplete dominance. Incomplete dominance. Now, that is basically exactly as it sounds. It is that there isn't one gene which is dominant and the other is recessive. What you end up having, remember that you could inherit two forms of the same gene, you could inherit one of each, or you could inherit the two recessive forms. Like, that's how we've understood genetics to work so far. Incomplete dominance doesn't really work like that. Basically what it's saying is, see, instead of having a big letter and a small letter, i.e. a dominant version and a recessive version, it's actually saying actually both genes are just as dominant as one another, so they kind of fight it out a bit more. So you can inherit, for example, two big R's, which would give you the whatever condition big R is, or you could actually inherit two S's, for argument's sake, which would give you a a condition which is related to having inherited two forms of the S gene. Now it doesn't matter what these conditions actually are, the principle of inheritance is because R is not any more dominant than S, so we don't use big R and small r, or big S and small s for that matter, we use R because R is a gene, a condition in its own right, S is a gene, a condition in its own right, and are equally as dominant as each other. So what happens is, which is kind of what you might imagine would happen generally, but it doesn't, is in the case of incomplete dominance, if you inherit a big R from, an R from one parent and an S from another parent, generally speaking, that gives you some sort of halfway house condition. So let's assume that that's normal. So having two big R's, inheriting two big R's means that you have inherited the condition. You know, you don't have the condition. Having the condition requires you to have inherited two S's. So if you inherit an R and an S, you can be partially affected. And to be honest with you, the most common or the most discussed version of this is the condition we have talked about, which is sickle cell anemia. In order to have sickle cell anemia, which is really, really bad, you die very young, your red blood cells are sickle shaped, so they don't carry oxygen very efficiently, and you can't, you can't operate properly, so you die at a young age. That's sickle cell anemia. Having normal blood cells, which is what most of us do have, is when you inherit big R, or whatever letter you want to use. But you get a sickle cell trait in this condition where you can actually inherit one gene for sickle cell anemia from one parent and a normal gene from the other parent, and that gives you sickle cell trait. Now, interestingly enough, if you are a sickle cell trait, if you have sickle cell trait, you're actually immune to malaria, because the malarial parasite climbs inside your red blood cells. So having sickle cell, ever so partially sickle cells, so they're just out of shape but they're not quite as bad as these, again, you will not have a particularly normal life, but you will have resistance to malaria. Which you will find in malarial areas, that is more, you will find people with sickle cell trait are more common in that population as a result of that. So this is an example of the environment selecting for a certain condition. Even if that condition is not particularly good for you, it can actually be favoured for in a malarial region. Anyway, so that's incomplete dominance, which is the third of the four scenarios, and the last one is where a condition is what we call sex-linked. Sex-linked. So if we go to the next of the four, again, what you might want to do is pause between each of these and have a think about them, have a wee look at what I've paused and what's on the screen. So as I said, the fourth of the four scenarios is the idea that things are sex-linked. Now, a sex-linked condition is inherited in quite a different way, because as you might imagine, they're not found on the autosomes. Instead, the condition is found on the sex chromosomes. And remember what I told you at the start, men inherit an X and a Y. Males are an X and a Y, females inherit an X and an X. So all eggs that are ever produced in the human population are all X eggs. Of all sperm that are produced, 50% of them are X sperm and 50% of them are Y sperm. Now, a sex-linked condition is found on the X chromosome, and this is where it becomes slightly more complex. So actually we focus in the course on sex-linked recessive conditions. So, and we again use letters to represent dominance and recessive, but you have to keep the X and the Y, because it's very important to understand whether you're dealing with a male or a female. The reason being that a sex-linked gene is found only on the X chromosome. So the two different possibilities for a male, let's take for example big B and small b, right? We could say that it's colour blindness, because red-green colour blindness is sex-linked recessive. So the two different possibilities for a male is you could be X big BY And you don't put a letter on the Y because the Y doesn't actually have a gene. Remember the difference, an X chromosome is really big and a Y chromosome is really wee. See this part here? That's where you'll find your sex-linked genes. So colour blindness is somewhere on the X chromosome. So a male could be X big BY, which is normal vision, or a male could be X small by, which is somebody that's got the condition. Now females are different, of course, because they've got two forms of the X chromosome, so they can be X big B, X big B, which is normal vision. They could also be X big B, X small b, which is again normal vision, because remember that's dominant to that one, so it doesn't matter that they've got that. And the female, the third option is to have X small b, and that person would have colour blindness. So this person here, that female there, and that male there, out of the 5 different options, would be the ones that would be colourblind because they don't have a big B to like protect them, as opposed to, is a good way of looking at it, from being colourblind. So yeah, and then we would start to think about the likelihood. If we know about the parents' conditions, we can start to think, well, what's the likelihood of an individual having being colourblind? So we take, for example, a colourblind dad and a woman who has got one form of the gene normal and the other form colourblind. So she's not colourblind herself, but see that person that's got the potential to produce a child that's got the condition, that person is called a carrier. So they're a carrier of the gene, but they don't actually have the condition themselves. So there's all different things that can occur here. Let's think about the boys that could be produced. And let's think about the girls that could be produced. So if it's a boy that's produced, then the dad has to have passed on his Y chromosome, right? It's the only option, because if the dad passes on his X chromosome, then you get a girl, right? So the dad passes on his Y chromosome. The mum can pass on either X big B or X small b. So there's actually a 50-50 chance of the son being colourblind. When it comes to the girls though, the girl could inherit has to inherit X small b from the dad. Has to, because that's what he passes on to his daughters. And again, the mum can pass either that or that. So we could end up with X big B, X small b, so the daughter could also be a carrier. Or, actually the mum could pass on X small b, so yeah, we'd end up with a female who's actually a sufferer of the condition. Right? Now that is actually quite rare, and it's more common in actual fact that would really only be possible if a carrier mum had a baby with an affected dad, which is obviously quite a rare thing to happen because it's recessive, so it's less likely to be found in the population. But what you will always find, and this is the sort of rule with sex-linked recessive conditions, the condition is passed from mother to son, right? That's to try and remember, because the dad always passes his Y to the son. So see, if a son has got a sex-linked condition, he must have got the condition from his mum, because it's sex-linked, and Y chromosomes that males get from their dad don't have a form of the gene on them. Okay? Now, there will be a set of questions I will post for this, along with the homework. So I'm hoping by the end of the next week or so, we'll have our head right around this. Please make sure you watch the now 3 videos. So the first one is just really a wee preparation for this topic, which you don't really need to watch if you're happy enough with Inheritance at National 5 level. But watch the first video, which doesn't say video 2, just says that title without video 2. Watch that one first before you watch this one. Just realised this is the most useless point to tell you to do that, but I'm hoping you work it out from the title and the fact that it says video 2 at the top. If you have sat through all of this and watched it, it's not been a waste of time, but you'll need to make sure you watch the first of the 2 videos as well. And as I said, watch it, rewind it, pause it, whatever you need to do to put yourself in a position where you are confident that you're able to answer the questions required in the homework and ultimately in the exam. Right, thanks folks.